My name is Bruno Bianchi Sarcone. I run SpainGuru.es, and this is the Spanish Taxes Overview Webinar 2025. Today is Tuesday, October 14th, 2025. A little bit about SpainGuru.es. Our objective is facilitating the relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014. And you can see we have some wonderful reviews online, especially on Trustpilot, almost 200 reviews, most of them 5 stars, and also on Google. So you are in very good hands. You can use SpainGuru.es for free. Everything on SpainGuru.es is free, except if you engage with my personally vetted professionals. But you can join my weekly newsletter that I send every single Monday, where I feature top discussions on Spain Guru's Facebook groups and Reddits, and also the most watched videos on Spain Guru's YouTube channel, and also investigation blog posts. You can also subscribe to Spain Guru's YouTube channel that features more than 1,000 videos and more than 7,100 subscribers as of today. I have a blog with almost 2,000 articles, many of them about taxes, and as I mentioned, a huge community with an aggregated total number of members of more than 150,000 members, where the top groups are Spanish immigration, Spanish NLV, Spanish DMV, and many more groups. All those are absolutely free resources, but not only those, I have also on the right a Move to Spain checklist that you can find on SpainGuru.es. If you're planning to move to Spain, you can just go and check the checklist here. It is absolutely free. For example, I start 1 year before, and you have every single step, right, with videos and explanations and so much more. Yes, so that is free. And also my newly released Spanish destinations with 13 destinations in Spain. That is always updated because I have links to the most important free resources, numbeo.com, Idealista, to check the prices of rentals, to check the prices of different things in those cities, the weather in those cities. But as I said, everything is updated automatically. So yes, definitely worth checking out. And if you plan to move to Spain or you're in the decision phase, I highly recommend you at least engaging with immigration experts, at least consult with one for 1 hour, and at least consult with an tax expert. Okay, so this tax expert can understand your specific situation and potentially run a simulation of your taxes once you move to Spain. And of course, you can find my personally vetted professionals on SpainGuru.es. Just go to the top menu or push the Get Expert Help button, and you have all the services there. You can find also many other services like residency or visa compliant health insurance, medical certificates, sworn translations, apostle services, bank accounts, money transfer services with discounts, property rentals, mortgages if you plan to buy properties in Spain, shipping companies, parcel companies, so many services out there, all of them with stellar reviews. I can safely say I am recommending you the best services out there that I have been recommended, most of them, 95% of them, for more than 1, 2, 3 years. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. This presentation is for general information only and not legal, financial, or tax advice. For personal guidance, consult with a qualified advisor. Find trusted experts on SpainGuru.es. And remember that SpainGuru is not liable for errors or outcomes from using this information. I'm not a tax advisor, so definitely engage with experts if you want to go deeper. Now, the objectives of this webinar are four. The first one, gain an overview of Spanish taxes. The second is to prepare for having more informed conversations, more sophisticated conversations with tax professionals, clarify the role of those tax professionals, and understand that this webinar will only provide general information and will never replace personalized tax advice. And identifying key considerations for expats. We're having a focus here in US and UK nationals, but I would say like 95% of the content of this webinar would apply to anyone moving to Spain. Be aware of also compliance requirements and deadlines. Okay, we're going to look at the different taxes and the different deadlines, okay, that you need to comply to be on the safe side and potentially avoiding potential penalties. Okay. Now, let's talk about the most important concepts in taxes, which is Spanish tax residency, right? So you become a Spanish tax resident in Spain, okay, when any of these three conditions happen. First one, you spend over 183 days in Spain within a calendar year that starts on January 1st to December 31st. Those days don't need to be consecutive, and they always count as long as there is physical presence. It doesn't matter your immigration status. For example, if you come to Spain for 10 days as a tourist, those 10 days count towards the count of those 183 days in a calendar year. Second, if your main economic activity or primary income source is from Spain. And third, if your family lives in Spain, right? So what happens when you become a Spanish tax resident? Well, you're liable for paying taxes to Spanish tax authorities on your global income and potentially on the net value of your assets via the wealth taxes. Now, what happens about those 183 days count per calendar year? If you arrive after July 2nd on a given year, there is only 182 days left until December 31st. Therefore, if you haven't been previously from July 2nd, previously to January 1st in Spain, you will only be 182 days during that calendar year. Therefore, you wouldn't become a Spanish tax resident as per the first condition, right? So always count the physical presence in Spain. 1 minute in Spain counts as a full day, okay? Always try to not be on the edge, in the limit, right? Now, we said once you become a Spanish tax resident, you would pay taxes on your global income and potentially on the net value of your assets. If you're a non-tax resident, for example, if you have income coming from Spain, if you are not a tax resident in Spain, but for example, you're owner of a property in Spain and you rent it out, you will have to pay taxes on that income to Spanish tax authorities as a tax resident. One important thing to point out is the difference between the Spanish tax year and the Spanish immigration year. As we mentioned, the Spanish tax year is a calendar year that starts on January 1st and ends on December 31st. So the clock goes back to zero every January 1st. Whereas the immigration year is a natural year that starts generally when you enter Spain, okay, holding a visa. And for example, you enter on July 2nd, yes, well, your immigration year starts on July 2nd until July 2nd the following year, right? So they may or not overlap. There are different things, right? And here's a more visual way to see it. You can see the three top bars. There are 3 years, 3 tax years that go from January 1st to December 31st. But then imagine you move on July 2nd, yes, and it goes towards July 2nd the following year. So for half of the calendar year, it will be 182 days, and the following tax year, if you live before July 2nd, it's 182 days. Therefore, you wouldn't be becoming a tax resident in any of those 2 given tax years. And of course, you can play with this depending on your immigration status, on your, let's say, short, mid, and long-term plans of staying in Spain, because you could potentially live in Spain without becoming a tax resident following different strategies, okay? We mentioned that non-residents who have income generated in Spain would pay taxes, of course, to Spanish tax authorities. Depending on which passport they hold, they would pay different tax rates. For example, if you're an EU passport holder, generally you would pay 19%, depending on the type of income. Whereas if you are a non-EU passport holder, generally you would pay around 24% flat rate, for example, on the income source from rental properties located in Spain. Now let's talk about the different tax systems and obligations in Spain. There's a general tax regime and a special tax regime. Under the general tax regime, you will find these taxes: personal income tax, regional wealth tax, nationwide solidarity tax, and this is not a tax, it is an informative form called the 720 form, where you disclose the existence of overseas assets. Okay. Then under the special tax regime, which is also called the Beckham law, is a different treatment. And of course, you need to be eligible for this special tax regime. Generally, people who are eligible for this special tax regime are employees who move to Spain. Okay. Now, if you're not an employee, if you're, for example, a contractor, okay, or you are a retiree, generally you won't be eligible for this special tax regime. Therefore, you will fall into the general tax regime. Now, imagine that you are eligible for this special tax regime called Beckham law. There are advantages and disadvantages. Okay. Advantages. The most common one is that you would pay a flat 24% tax rate, right, on your taxed income. Okay. And generally, you wouldn't pay tax on income generated outside of Spain, with the exemption of employment. Okay. But for example, if you have properties outside of Spain and you rent them out, whatever, you won't pay taxes to Spanish tax authorities. You will not have the requirement of submit the 720 form or pay the Spanish wealth tax or solidarity tax. Now, there are a few cons, okay? And as per these cons, tax advisors usually recommend applying for this regime only if you are making more than 55,000 euros of annual taxable income, okay? Because there are additional administrative burdens that may outweigh the benefits. There are no family deductions, there are no allowances. Therefore, if you're making less than this threshold, it usually is better to be included in the general tax regime. So have that threshold in mind. Now let's talk about the first tax obligation. We mentioned you have to disclose your overseas assets, and this happens when you become a Spanish tax resident. This is called the Modelo 720, and you have to disclose your assets outside of Spain in different categories, and only if the total value of each category goes over 50,000 euros. The categories are bank accounts, for example, investments, real estate, crypto. Now, how do you calculate this? Imagine that you have two bank accounts outside of Spain, and the money in each of those accounts is 25,000 euros. In the category bank account, you will be summing or adding those two bank accounts. 25,000 doubles times two will be 50,000 euros. Therefore, now you have the obligation to disclose the existence of those two bank accounts because the total category is 50,000 euros. Why authorities want to see the existence of these assets, okay, or properties or rights held abroad? Because they may take their own conclusions, whether or not you are generating income from those assets, etc., etc. Okay, and also they want to calculate your total net worth to see if you are over certain thresholds like the wealth tax or solidarity tax. Now, you don't have to disclose, you don't have to submit the 720 form every year unless there are variations of more than 20,000 euros per category or asset closures. The deadline for submitting the 720 form is March 31st, and you submit the total value of your assets and right held abroad by December 31st the previous year. And normally, if you work with a tax advisor, with a tax accountant, you will start preparing for this form on January 1st, so 3 months before. The second tax obligation is the income tax, okay, the personal income tax or IRPF. That you file once annually on June 30th. For example, on June 30th, 2026, we're going to be paying the income tax for the 2025 tax year, right? And within the income tax, you will find different types of income. You have ordinary income and you have investment income, taxed at different tax rates. Ordinary income has progressive tax rates that range from 19% to 47%. Within this type of income, you will find salaries or work income, rental income, and business earnings. Whereas in investment incomes, you would find dividends, interest, capital gains tax, which is taxed at lower rates from 19% to 30%. in many places have not updated the last bracket for this type of income. Many people have 28% for the top bracket, but as of January 1st, 2025, it went up to 30%. Now, the deadlines, as we said, the annual income tax is filed on June 30th, okay? And also the preparation begins 3 months earlier, okay? But remember that if you are in Spain working as a contractor, freelancer, 1099, or in Spanish, autónomo, you also have to file income tax on a quarterly basis and also VAT, right? And you would normally pay 20% income tax on your earnings by quarter, and then in the annual payment you will pay the difference. That normally you will be making more, and you will have to always pay the difference, because 20% income tax is not very easy to have if you are working as a foreigner in Spain as an autónomo. Now, as you probably know, if you're a US citizen, a US passport holder, you always have to file taxes in the United States, regardless whether you are a tax resident anywhere else. You always have to file taxes. Good news are that there is a tax treaty between Spain and the US, and also with the UK and many other countries, that will avoid making you pay for the same thing twice, right? Now, the way you do it is by crediting what you paid in a certain jurisdiction, you will credit it towards the payment of another jurisdiction. Generally, what people do, okay, and there is no clear rule about this on where to file taxes first, but what most Americans do, since taxes had to be submitted to US authorities in April, okay, if you live overseas, you will get an automatic extension until June 15th. So people would pay Spanish taxes. They would have their income tax, annual income tax filing for Spanish tax authorities before that date, and then they will credit what they have to pay to Spanish tax authorities towards what they are filing in the US, making it that you will not have to pay anything in the US, but just file for information. There is also another extension that goes to October, okay, that you can also file if you didn't make it for June 15th. But any time that you file for extensions, you will have to pay some interest and so on. But that exists, okay? There's a lot of discussions about whether you have to pay taxes in Spain first or you do it first in the US, with pros and cons about doing both of those situations. But most of people, I would say, pay first in Spain and then file in the US. Now, let's talk about how the progressive tax brackets work, okay? This is a common misconception. People ask, round numbers, if I make 100K taxable income, would I have to pay 45% income tax on that income? Why do they ask this? If you look on the right, these are the tax brackets, the progressive tax brackets for income tax, okay, or ordinary income. And you can see on the fifth bracket that ranges from 60,000 euros to 300,000 euros, it's 45%. So if I am making 100K taxable income, would I have to pay 45%? And the answer is no. Really, the effective tax rates for 100K taxable income, this is without deductions or allowances or anything, just ballpark figure for illustration purposes only, is 36% effective tax rate. The way it works is that you will start paying 19% for the first 12,450 euros that you make, then 24% for the following 7,500 euros, 30% for the next bracket, etc., etc. So you will be paying sort of average or median of those tax brackets, right? So for 100K, you will be paying an effective tax rate of about 36%. And if I calculate the different incomes and the different effective tax rates by income, this is the progression. 30,000 euros, you will be paying 24%. For 40K, 26%. For 50K, 29%. For 60-30, for 70-32, and as we said, for 100K, 36%. And this is how you normally calculate the different tax brackets for the progressive taxes, okay, which are several ones, right? For example, the wealth tax also has progressive tax brackets, or the solidarity tax. Now, now that we mentioned them, the third tax obligation are the regional wealth tax and nationwide solidarity taxes. As we said, the wealth tax is a regional tax. Okay, so the different regions in Spain, 17 regions, have some freedom to choose how they apply this tax. Okay, so depending on where you move to Spain, it could be more favorable or worse. Okay, for example, regions like Madrid, Andalucía, Cantabria, and Extremadura, they have higher exemptions, okay, or higher thresholds or 100% rebates, making it like basically you don't have to pay wealth tax. Okay. Also, Valencia, the last news is that they're raising their 500,000 euros threshold to apply this tax to 1 million, okay, on the net value of your assets, right? So this is becoming also a more favorable region where to move to, right? How do you calculate this tax? Well, you have to calculate your net worth. You need to calculate the value of your properties, of the cash that you have in the bank accounts, of your rights that you have, etc., etc. And if you are over a certain threshold, and that threshold is set by the by the region where you're living, where you're a tax resident, well, you would be paying wealth tax or not. There are certain deductions, allowances, like having properties, for example, raises the allowance, okay, for the taxable income. But yes, basically, remember those favorable communities, and remember that it does matter where you move to when it comes to the regional wealth tax. There is something called the 60% rule, which will limit the wealth tax liability to 60% of the taxable income. Okay. And using this rule, you can reduce it to up to 80%. Okay. In summary, wealth tax is capped at 60% of your income, but at least 20% of the wealth tax must still be paid. This is for the situation in which you have a very high net worth, okay, or a high net worth, but you have very little income, right? So it is hard to explain and also hard to understand this rule, but just remember that this rule exists and that you potentially could ask your tax advisor to have that in mind when you calculate your wealth tax. The deadline for the regional wealth tax is June 30th, so the same as the personal income tax, and you also begin to prepare it 3 months before. Then there is the nationwide solidarity tax, which is a quite new tax that was temporarily applied and never went away, which is, doesn't matter where you move, you will always be liable if you're over the threshold. The threshold is 3 million euros, okay, so much higher than the regional wealth taxes that usually is from 500,000 euros and onwards, right, depending on the region, okay? And you also have allowances and deductions, and the deadline is on July 31st, 1 month after the regional wealth tax. And this is done because whatever you pay as regional wealth tax can be credited towards the payment of the nation solidarity tax. Let's look at the calculation. Okay, this is again ballpark figure for illustration purposes only. One person who moves to Catalonia and purchases an apartment in Catalonia, the value of that apartment is 300,000 euros, and this person has a total net worth of 1 million euros, right? So as we said, Catalonia is one of the least favorable regions where to move in terms of regional wealth tax because the threshold is low, it's 500,000 euros only, right? So if this person has a total assets of 1 million euros, and you can deduct the value of the property has to be located in Spain, so 500,000 euros non-taxable income plus 300,000 euros of the property, then the only taxable income is 200,000 euros. You apply the progressive tax rates, and this person would be paying a little bit less than 500 euros per year for wealth tax. If this person has 1.5 million, this person will be paying a little over 3,000 euros. For 2 million, 8,000 euros. For 2.5 million, almost 14,000 euros for that year. And remember that the solidarity tax starts at 3 million euros. Therefore, then whatever you have paid for wealth tax will be deducted from what you have to pay for solidarity tax.
60% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. That's a lot of people getting value without hitting that button. If my videos have helped you understand Spain's immigration process, visas, or life here, even just once, please subscribe now. I'm working hard to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2025, and your click truly makes a difference. Thanks so much. Now, let's keep going.
Now, let's talk a little bit about digital nomads. Okay, what about the taxes for people who move to Spain as employees or contractors using, for example, the digital nomad visa scheme, right? Or teleworkers visa of international character. This is the name in Spanish. Now, there are two ways on how you move to Spain under this visa. As an employee working from a company outside of Spain, and usually these companies are only from the UK and the US. Why? Because you need to provide a certificate of coverage stating that you are paying Social Security in those countries. And really, the certificate of coverage or A1 form that is accepted by Spanish authorities is only from the UK and from the USA right now. It wasn't accepted in the previous months for the USA, but now they start to accept as well. Okay, so you're moving to Spain as an employee working remotely for a non-Spanish company. Potentially, you could be eligible for the Beckham law. Okay, this is important. Now, if you move to Spain as a contractor or 1099 or freelancer, you become an autónomo in Spain, chances are that you are not eligible for the Beckham law, okay, for the special tax regime. And if you move as a contractor, you will then be responsible for paying Social Security in Spain that will grant you access to public healthcare system, Spanish pension, if you parental leave, etc. Right? And also you will have to pay taxes in Spain, okay, as general regime for income tax, right? And you will have to pay it not only on a yearly basis, but also do quarterly submissions for income tax and VAT as well, and potentially other things. But yeah, the important thing that I want you to know is that if you become a autónomo in Spain, then you have to have all this arranged, and definitely you should go, in my opinion, with a tax advisor, a gestor, or tax accountant. That of course you can find recommendations on SpainGuru.es, because filing those taxes is really, really complicated, and it's very easy to make mistakes, costly mistakes, to be clear. Now, let's look at a specific case. Someone who arrived on September 2024 in Spain and applied for the DNV. As you probably know, the Digital Nomad Visa is one of the visas that you can apply from within Spain, and actually it is advantageous to do it from Spain. This person applied 1 month after for the Digital Nomad Visa, got approved in November, and registered as autónomo in December. Okay, you have to register as autónomo as soon as you get your Digital Nomad Visa approved. Okay, you have to. Now, this person is asking if this person arrived in September, spent less than 183 days in Spain in 2024. Do they have to pay taxes in 2024? And if yes, how? So, an expert says this is in a particularly gray area, as you weren't resident until you got your tarjeta de identidad extranjero or residency card. So officially, you weren't even allowed to work. You're supposed to pay tax in the country where you're physically working. So strictly speaking, on any work performed since September. So this person wasn't a tax resident in Spain, but was working on their computer, sitting on a cafe in a Spanish city. Technically, they need to pay tax on that income. How? Experts will say as a non-resident for 2024, and then in 2025, once they become a Spanish tax resident, they will pay taxes as Spanish tax residents. Okay. Now, some news here, and this is a slide that I added today, and also I am autónomo, so these are very not very happy news. Yesterday, there were news from the government, and they want to increase the Social Security contributions by 2026. Okay, and the increases are quite big, especially for higher earners. Okay, and you can see there that, and I did this chart also to make it clearer. I think you can see in blue what the different thresholds are paying today. Okay, how much you are earning. You have to pay a certain level of social security for the second and third year. So for the smaller earners, it will go up by 17 euros for social security monthly payments. But if you're over 6,000 euros of monthly income, you will go for the top threshold for 590 euros social security contribution to almost 800 euros. Okay, so this is a project. Okay, this is not, let's say, approved or passed or anything, but definitely they have the power to do it and the interest in doing so. So I am quite, I'm not saying the word optimistic, but yes, it is very, very possible that this actually happens, because this government also is desperate to get money from anywhere in order to support all their expenses, which are the highest in history of Spain. Now, if you want to know more about digital nomads, you can also join my Spanish Digital Nomad webinar that I hold every 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, I think I hold one this very week. So if you want to go deeper into this type of visa, definitely join that webinar. It is absolutely free, and I always send a recording. Now, if you just join or join afterwards, remember there's a Q&A session at the end. I will answer all the questions. And if you need to leave earlier and you think the information that I'm sharing with you today is valuable, if you learn something new and you think SpainGuru.es is awesome, you can leave a review on Trustpilot. There's a red button there on the top green bar. It would take you only 3 seconds just to leave a review, and it will make me extremely, extremely happy and motivate me so much, and also help others to find this content. And let's talk about additional taxes in Spain that I want to bring to your attention. Inheritance and gift tax. This is a regional tax, so depending where you are inheriting or receiving a gift or giving it, or if you die and you have heirs, depending on where you do it, it's going to be more expensive or more affordable for the heirs. So there are different tax reductions and exemptions, and this tax really, really varies a lot depending on the region. For example, again, Catalonia is not very favorable, and Madrid is much better in that sense. Okay, people say that it's much cheaper to die in Madrid than in Catalonia. Okay, then there is the transfer tax that applies to property purchases. Now you can purchase two types of properties: new built property or secondhand property. If you purchase new built property, there is a general VAT of 10% nationwide that you have to pay for the property. If it's a secondhand property, you will have to pay a regional transfer tax. So it will vary according to the region. Cheapest region is Madrid, only 6% transfer tax when you purchase a property. You have 60 days, natural days, to pay that tax after you sign the deeds. Okay, Andalusia is 7%, and regions like Valencia or Catalonia are among the highest. Now, there's been announcement from the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who wants to tackle the housing crisis, and said that non-EU passport holders who are non-residents in Spain should pay 100% of the property value as a transfer tax, not raising the transfer tax 100% or doubling it. No, if you're buying a 300,000 property, you will have to pay 300,000 euros transfer tax. This is what he said, right? We're going to talk about that later on. No, let's talk about that right now. Basically, I have recorded several videos with Ainhoa Manero of Stern Abogados, expert immigration lawyer, with Marco Gonzalez, expert tax lawyer. You can watch those videos, but long story short, it is highly unlikely that they do it, and more unlikely that they will have any effect in the housing market, because really non-EU, non-resident buyers in 2024 were less than 3% of the total transactions in the market in Spain. Therefore, and also these people, many of them, they just buy before they become residents, but then they become residents, and then this wouldn't apply, really. So they would just wait until becoming residents in order to buy properties, right? So it is really a political announcement that doesn't have any impact for sure. So, but so far, they have been discussing this and they are seeing ways to implement it. Let's see how it goes. Okay, but it is highly unlikely that that happens. Then, once you own a property in Spain, you will be paying property tax, okay, called IBI, that will depend on the location of your property, if it has swimming pool, the amount of square meters, if you live in a nice neighborhood with a lot of amenities, etc., etc. Big variations. Okay, for example, in Malaga, where I live, Malaga City has, let's say, a lower EV, whereas if I move 10 minutes away from here to Torremolinos, it is double the EV. Okay, just because, depending on the on what the different cities want to apply for EV, right? One thing that stayed in my mind, I'm talking to many Americans, they say that generally for the same size property in the US, they pay 12 times more. Okay, so what you pay on a yearly basis in Spain, this is what they pay in places like Florida or California or New Jersey, whatever, or Illinois. They will pay on a monthly basis. What we pay here in Spain on a yearly basis. Okay, so for example, for 100 square meters property in Malaga, you will be paying about 300 euros EV. Now, there is the municipal capital gains tax, okay, the plusvalía municipal, and also the capital gains tax that we mentioned before under the income tax or income gains, okay, and these are different taxes that I want to compare so that you know, right? So, for example, if you sell a property abroad, potentially you will pay capital gains tax if you're a Spanish tax resident, okay? But if you sell a property from Spain, you will also have to pay not only capital gains tax, okay, if you're a Spanish tax resident, but also a local town hall gains tax called plusvalía municipal, which is based on the increase of the land value. These are different taxes, okay? And the plusvalía municipal or the local town hall, of course, would not apply if you're selling a property outside of Spain. This is important clarification, in my opinion. We mentioned the capital gains tax. One of the common questions is, how can I avoid it? Yes. And many people are selling properties in jurisdictions that have low capital gains tax or none at all. Okay, therefore, it is quite sad that you sell those properties and then you move to Spain, you become a Spanish tax resident, and therefore you will become liable for that sale for capital gains tax. Now, the best way to do it, and there are ways to mitigate this capital gains tax. For example, if you're older than 65 years old, if you sell your primary property where you've been living in the previous 3 years, if you use the total proceeds of that sale to buy another property in Spain, yes, all these conditions could help you mitigate the capital gains tax. But the best way to do it, if you are moving to Spain for the first time, let's say, is to sell your home in a different tax year than the one that you become a Spanish tax resident. Best way to see it is you sell your property on December 31st and you move to Spain on January 1st. Okay, these are different tax years. Selling your property was not in the same tax year in which you became a Spanish tax resident. This is the first case scenario. Second case scenario, you spend less than 182 days in the same calendar year in which you sold your home. For example, you sell your home in January 2026, you get your visa to come to Spain in April 2026, and you move to Spain after July 2nd, 2026. Therefore, there are 182 days left during the calendar year, that tax year. Therefore, you wouldn't become a Spanish tax resident. But if you move earlier and you spend more than 183 days during 2026, then it is retroactive. So all the taxable events from January 1st, that same tax year, would be liable for paying tax to Spanish tax authorities. So be careful with that. The capital gains tax, it's taxed at progressive tax rates that range from 19% to 30%. Okay. And a case scenario for this, imagine you bought your property for 100K, you sold it for 200K, you made a capital gain of 100K, you apply the progressive tax rates, as we saw before, you would be paying an effective tax rate of those 100K of 21.9% effective tax rate that you can save if you time you're moving to Spain. A lot of people ask in the Spain group communities, should I sell my home right now before moving to Spain, or should I keep it and rent it out? So I have articles about that. There's pros and cons for both the options, but one of the disadvantages is that once you move to Spain and you become potentially a Spanish tax resident, you sell your home, you would have to pay capital gains tax on that sale. So it's also something that you need to add to the equation, okay, or to your considerations. Now, let's talk about retiring in Spain. One of the common questions is your pension taxable, right? And generally, yes, it is taxable, okay? But let's go through it. First of all, your pension will be taxed if you're a Spanish tax resident, and the threshold for declaring those pensions is 22,000 euros annual threshold. But if you have multiple income sources, the threshold goes down to 12,000 and only 1,500 euros from secondary sources. But important is that pensions from abroad will always appear as a second payer. So if they're greater than 1,500 euros, you still have to file them, okay? Declare them. Progressive tax rates are common tax rates from 19% to 47%. Now, as per the tax treaties between the US, UK, and other countries like Canada, Australia, etc., Social Security and private pensions are taxable, but government or public pensions are generally exempt. Okay. Now, many people also say, like, what if I become a Spanish citizen? Okay, because Spain typically, not always, will ask you to renounce your previous citizenship if you want to become Spanish. Therefore, it wouldn't be applicable the Spanish-US tax treaty. Yes, and this is a gray area. I haven't really met anyone who was in this situation, unfortunately. And I also interview immigration lawyers about this, and they think that nothing would happen. You would still benefit from the tax treaty, regardless of becoming Spanish citizen. Okay, so gray area right now about this. The allowances for pensioners for ages 65 to 74 is 6,700 euros annual allowance, and over 75 is 8,100 euros allowance. Taxation of American 401ks and Roth IRAs in Spain. 401k taxation in Spain, the distributions are taxed as general income at progressive rates from 19 to 47%, and traditionally exempt from Modelo 720, overseas assets reporting and wealth tax. But careful, because interpretations are changing. So there is divided interpretations about this, okay, whether the 401k should be reported in 720 and wealth tax. Roth IRA taxation, investment gains tax as income at progressive rates up to 30%, must be reported in Modelo 720 annually based on the account surrender value as of December 31st, and subject to wealth tax with rates varying by region. Okay, again, not every tax advisor will tell you this is correct. Okay, I think tax advisors will tell you, you want to be on the safe side, report it. You want to take some risk, don't do it. Okay, this is more or less what people are mentioning about these accounts. But as I said, this is not tax advice. I'm not a tax advisor. Always consult with someone that you can find on Spenguru.es, someone who has knowledge about this type of accounts from the US. Okay, so important to mention that there is a consulta vinculante. Okay, consulta vinculante is when an individual or company asks for the official interpretation of a rule to an authority in Spain, right? And vinculante means that it is, let's say, legal. Okay, it is. There are consequences to it. Okay, and this person asked whether IRAs and 401ks should be reported to Form 720, and the tax authority said yes, you need to report them. Okay, but the tax authorities are the tax authorities. They are not judges. Okay, and maybe they are not applying the right interpretation of the laws. Okay, but it's important for me to bring to your attention that this consulta vinculante exists. If you want to read more content about the different taxations, depending if you're from the US, if you're from the UK, You can read Spain Guru's blog posts, okay, taxes for Americans living in Spain or taxes in Spain for UK expats. Those articles are quite complete, so reading them will give you a general overview of what we are talking about. Now let's talk about non-lucrative visa holders or people who are thinking about becoming one. Do I have to become a tax resident in order to renew my non-lucrative visa? So this is thinking ahead, right? So you get your non-lucrative visa, you come to Spain, and you can live 1 year in Spain, and then you have to renew it for 2 more years, right? In order to renew it, you have a minimum stay requirement just to renew it. Now, let's talk about that minimum stay requirements that not only apply for non-lucrative visa, but for every temporary visa. Okay, any visa that is below 5 years, any residency type below 5 years, generally, it has this minimum stay requirement for the renewal, right? And the answer to the question, do I have to become a tax resident in order to renew my NLV is no, you don't have to. Okay, you don't have to. Because the minimum stay requirement that legislators added to the last regulation of 183 days minimum stay in order to renew your visa was challenged by a Supreme Court ruling. Okay, that very same Supreme Court ruling made delete the minimum stay requirements in the previous Reglamento de Extranjería or ruling, bylaw, okay, and said that if legislators want to include a minimum stay requirements for renewal of visas or residencies, they should include it in a higher hierarchy law, which is the organic law for 2000, okay, that takes more control, takes more process in order to renew. But legislators, they want to do a shortcut, which is not exactly legal, okay, and added this minimum stay requirement, okay, that applies for an immigration year, not to a tax year. So immigration year is a natural year that may or not overlap with a tax year, right, as I explained before. So first of all, in order to renew, now if you get denied your renewal of your visa because you stayed less than 183 days, it is very easy to appeal and to win because there is a Supreme Court ruling that says no minimum should be requested. Okay. Now remember, this is only for the renewal of your visa or temporary residency. If you are going for the long-term residency or for the citizenship, there are other minimum stay requirements, okay, that you need to comply to. I'm not talking about those. For example, for long-term residence, you can't be outside of Spain more than 10 months in the previous 5 years before applying. And for Spanish citizenship, depending on the type of residency that you hold, you cannot be more than 3 months each year before applying for the Spanish citizenship. Those you need to observe, okay, those minimum stays. I'm just talking about the renewals, okay, and about becoming a tax resident. Imagine that you want to come to Spain as a non-lucrative visa holder because you want to stay in Spain more than 90 days, Schengen rules, okay, and you want to renew it next time, right? Just renew it, but you don't want to go for the long-term residency. You don't need to become a Spanish tax resident, okay, in that situation, right? If you're in this situation and you want to pursue this strategy, highly recommend you going with immigration experts, tax experts that you can find on Spainguru.es. And you can also watch my interview to Ainhoa Manero, expert immigration lawyer and chief lawyer of Stern Abogados, that I highly recommend. She did my Spanish citizenship. I'm originally from Argentina. She's wonderful. She knows Spanish immigration like no one else. So watch these interviews and stay updated. And I think I'm publishing like an interview with her every 15 days. So yeah, definitely something to have in mind. It is free to subscribe to Spainguru's YouTube channel. And if you like it, give it a like if you watch a video. Now let's talk now generally and condensing everything that we saw today together in one single cheat sheet. Okay. This cheat sheet, later on, you can review it in the recording if you want. First, tax residency in Spain. If you stay more than 183 days in Spain on a calendar year, you will become a Spanish tax resident, being liable to pay taxes on your global income and potentially on the net value of your assets. Okay. Two other conditions. if you have income from Spain, more income, principal income from Spain, or your family lives in Spain. Non-tax residents also pay tax, but only on the income source from Spain. Key tax obligations. First, Modelo 720, overseas assets declarations for asset categories more than 50,000 euros, deadline March 31st. Personal income tax, deadline June 30th for everyone, but autonomous also on a quarterly basis. You will pay progressive tax rates that range from 19% to 47%, or investment income tax from 19% to 30%. Wealth is a regional tax, wealth tax, and then the nationwide solidarity tax. Deadlines are June 30th and July 31st. Remember, regional tax depends where you move, and different threshold will apply, or you will not pay any wealth tax. And national solidarity tax is a higher threshold starting at 3 million euros. There are allowances and deductions. Okay. And the most favorable communities in general are Madrid and Andalusia, and other ones like Cantabria or Extremadura. Special tax regimes, Beckham law, usually 99% of cases applicable only to employees moving to Spain, with perks like paying a flat 24% tax rate on your income. Okay, you don't pay tax on your global income except for the exemption of employment. Okay, but you wouldn't pay non-Spanish, other types of non-Spanish income. You wouldn't file 720. You wouldn't file wealth tax. But people say, experts say that if you make less than 55,000 euros of taxable income, then you shouldn't go for this type of special tax regime. Then taxation of pensions. Okay, generally, Social Security and private pensions are taxable, but as per the Spanish tax treaties with the different countries, government and public pensions should be exempt. Taxation of U.S. investment accounts, 401k, tax as general income, Roth IRAs, investment gains tax up to 30%. Potentially, you need to declare them for Modelo 720. Taxes for digital nomads, employees, potentially eligible for Beckham law. Okay, and they have to provide a social security certificate from their countries, USA or UK, normally. Or if they come to Spain and they don't get the certificate, either their companies open a company in Spain and pay social security in Spain, or they become autonomous or freelancers, and then they have to pay social security in Spain, and they have to pay quarterly and annual taxes and gather also VAT. Additional taxes, inheritance and gift tax. This is a regional tax. Property tax when you buy secondhand property versus the nationwide deducted 10% VAT for new built properties. Capital gains tax that you can avoid by timing your move to Spain or with allowances and deductions if you're older than 65, etc. Transfer tax for secondhand properties. Okay, sorry. So before I confuse property tax, EV, this is if you own a property in Spain, you will pay this property tax. But transfer tax is the regional tax. If you buy a property, depending on where you buy, you would pay this tax, okay? Whereas you would pay only 10% VAT if you're buying new build property. And deadlines to remember, okay? In one single place. 724, March 31st. This is the first one. Personal income tax, June 30th. Wealth tax, June 30th. Solidarity tax, July 31st. And if you're autonomous, quarterly payments as well, okay? Remember that Spain Guru can help. You can find my personally vetted professionals. And at least, I highly recommend you going with immigration and tax advisors that you can find right here. You can get expert help, or in services. If you push services, you get all my services here listed in one single place. Get your visa, legal docs, finances and taxes. If you click here, it will go to tax experts. You also have tax accountants or gestores. Okay, this is just for filing, every single month, especially if you're autonomous. US tax filings for expats as well, for US expats, financial planners. Okay, if you want to maintain at the very least your wealth or increase it, financial planners are very important, in my opinion. And you have here experts in US nationals and UK nationals as well. Mortgage in Spain, banks and money transfer. Probably need to transfer money here. You have solutions here and referral codes. So at least engage with tax experts. Okay, they don't have to be from Spain Guru. Any tax expert that you feel that should be, but engage with one. Okay, but yeah, definitely look at that, and you can also find it in the menu here. Okay, immigration lawyers and tax advice for Spain filings. You have everything here. Okay, now that I gave you all the information, we can go to, we have here the other webinars. You can join my other 5 webinars, and we can stay in touch. hello@spenguru.es is my email. You can always send me an email. I always answer my emails, giving you articles to read, videos to watch, giving you communities to join, and hoping to answer your questions. If they're not too technical, always, this is not legal advice or financial advice, but I will point you in the right direction. I'll do my best for that to happen. Watch my YouTube videos, join the newsletter, and remember that the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and is not tax or legal advice. Okay, always check with a professional tax advisor. And now we're gonna go with the Q&A session. Okay, remember that this is general presentation. This will never replace your individual circumstances. And let's talk about those questions. If you had to leave earlier, please leave a review on Trustpilot. And then now let's go. Thank you for joining today. What is the standard deduction in Spain? Do you have to declare your income if you make less? No, there is a standard deduction, which I think it's like 4,400 euros. Standard deduction, okay, or allowance, let's say. But then depending if you have kids, there's an allowance. It increases if you have kids, okay. And depending on if you're an employee versus an autónomo, okay. But yeah, and then that allowance goes up if you are over 65 years old, as I mentioned before. I think it's 6,700 euros, and it goes up after 74 years old to 8,100 euros. But I could be making a mistake, but yes, there is an allowance of non-taxable income. Is DNB accepted for UAE companies? Yes, it is accepted. Okay, it is accepted, and there are several people moving from UAE, okay, United Arab Emirates. UAE is not part of the Hague Convention for Apostles, so the way you legalize documents from UAE is a bit different, but definitely consulates, if you're applying from UAE consulates, or if you come to Spain as a tourist and you apply from Spain, make sure to prepare all this documentation, but make sure also to understand the ways to legalize UAE documents, okay? Police check, your diplomas, or the companies that you're applying with. There are different things. If you want to join my DNB webinar, you can do it. But yeah, you can definitely do it. Is Social Security reported as income? I mean, you can deduct it as an expense. Okay, Social Security. Actually, today I couldn't sleep, and I was answering messages at 4:30 in the morning, and I made a mistake on the DNB group, and people told me, like, Bruno, you just miscalculated, and it was true. The good thing is that I was too conservative about the Social Security contributions, but I wasn't that far away, actually, in my favor. But yes, I made a mistake on my calculation. And one of the comments, they pointed out that someone was asking, like, what is the total net that I will get in my pocket after Social Security and income tax for this income level? And yes, definitely, what you pay as a Social Security is an expense, and you can deduct it from your income, okay, to reduce your taxable income. Definitely, right? Where do pensions lie? Pensions lie. Okay, so pensions system in Spain, it is a solidarity system. So they don't go into a separate account, and that account is yours, unfortunately. And this is a huge liability for the Spanish welfare system, if this is what you are asking. Okay, but basically, what you pay as pension, it will pay someone's pension today, right? That's why Spain needs many more people paying their Social Security contributions, because the demographics is reducing. There are less working people and more pensionists, okay? and a huge size of the cake is going to pensionists. So it is a bit of Ponzi scheme, unfortunately, right? Because the money that you pay today, there's no guarantee that you will get it back tomorrow, because the money goes into a general box that the government takes today to pay the pensions today. Okay, so yeah, there is no guarantee that this system is actually sustainable in the long term, to put it nicely. I read that life insurance policies are to be declared in the 720 form. Is this correct? That's a great question. I don't know. Life insurance policies. That's a great question. I don't know. Maybe if you join a Spain Guru Facebook group, you can ask people what they are declaring in the 720 form. This is the first time I see this question asked. It's very interesting. I really appreciate you asking it, and I will try to find it. Okay, I will try to, let's see. I will screen share, like debo declarar seguro de vida en el formulario 720. Acciones de seguro de vida se tienen que declarar en el modelo 720 de Hacienda. Yes, you need to declare it. Seguros de vida. This is it. Existe obligación presentar información. So yes, this quick search here told me this. I'm not sure this is 100% checked, but here it clearly says these are stock, insurance, life insurance, investment funds, properties, bank accounts outside of Spain. You need to declare them in Modelo 720. So yeah, quick search there, show me these results. Now, are UK police and teacher pensions only taxed in the UK? As far as I understand, those are public pensions. So as per the UK-Spain tax treaty, those pensions can be taxed only at origin. Okay, but this is without analyzing your like this pension. Okay, maybe there are different teachers' pensions. Okay, because there were different teachers' positions. So it's important that you engage with the tax advisor to contrast, to make sure that that type of pension that you're providing falls into the public pension category. Okay, so I don't have any more questions, at least here. DNB is accepted. UK police pension. I don't see any more questions. I really appreciate you joining today. We have been here for 1 hour and 3 minutes. I will send you the recording very, very soon. I really appreciate you joining today. And you can always send me an email to @spenguru.es. And yeah, I'll see you around. And remember to join my other webinars here. I have a general move to Spain, but also have Non-Lucrative Visa, Digital Nomad Visa. Also, now that the Golden Visa program in Spain no longer exists as of April 2025, there are other alternatives in the European Union, like Portugal and Greece. So there's a webinar by our partners at Holborn Assets, and there is a Q&A session for Non-Lucrative Visa. Yes, so all these are free webinars that you can join today. So yes, thank you so much. And remember, leave a review on Trustpilot. It really, really helps and motivates me also to continue delivering information and hopefully value. And also, I will be crossing your fingers if you're applying for a visa or a residency or you're moving to Spain. I'll be sending good vibes from here, from Malaga, so that your plans get executed properly. Okay, and your dreams come true. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you, Joe 7 Evans, and everyone else. Take care and see you around. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.